being on the set with her the idea was it should feel like one of her dinner parties.
Those who worked closely with Meg Ryan often described her presence on set as something quietly intentional. She wanted the atmosphere to feel welcoming, unforced, familiar, less like a production and more like a gathering. The idea, she once suggested, was that a film set should feel like one of her dinner parties, warm, attentive, conversational. It wasn't about control or perfection. It was about ease, about making people feel safe enough to do honest work. That instinct would follow her throughout her career, even as the world around her grew louder, more demanding, and less forgiving. From the beginning, Meg understood something many performers learn too late, that creativity thrives best where people feel seen, not managed. The shock of a public gaze. Years later, when photos of her began circulating that sparked relentless commentary, the shift felt jarring. Not because she had changed, everyone does, but because the public decided her evolution required explanation. She didn't offer one. Silence, for her, wasn't evasion, it was self-protection. What people saw as mystery was simply a boundary. The world had grown accustomed to thinking it was entitled to her face, her image, her meaning. But Meg had already learned, long before, that visibility without agency can become a burden. She had spent decades performing accessibility. Now she chose privacy instead. Before the name meant anything, before the world knew her as Meg Ryan, she was Margaret Mary Emily Ann Hyra, a child growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut, within a home shaped by routine, responsibility, and quiet intention. Her parents valued education, structure, and consistency, creating an environment where effort mattered more than attention. Her mother, Susan, balanced teaching with an appreciation for performance, while her father, Harry, taught mathematics and believed deeply in discipline and accountability. Their household moved at a steady pace. Mornings followed familiar rhythms. Schoolwork was taken seriously. Faith and community provided grounding rather than spectacle. In that space, fame was not admired or feared because it simply wasn't present. It existed somewhere far away, abstract and unreal. What mattered instead was character, follow-through, and learning how to stand on one's own. Growing up among her siblings, Meg absorbed an early understanding that identity was not something announced to the world, but something shaped quietly through consistency and personal values. The moment that changed the house. That sense of predictability shifted dramatically when Meg was 15, a moment that quietly but permanently altered the emotional landscape of her life. Her mother left the family to pursue acting opportunities in New York, and the household restructured itself almost overnight. Her father became the primary anchor for 4 children, taking on responsibility with resolve but without fanfare. For Meg, the change was not defined by anger or rebellion, but by confusion and unanswered questions. It wasn't the pursuit of ambition that left the deepest mark. It was the abruptness, the absence of preparation, the feeling that something dependable had dissolved without warning. She carried that experience inward, processing it privately rather than publicly. Over time, it shaped how she understood trust, emotional security, and loyalty. Even as she matured and built her own life, that early disruption remained present beneath the surface, quietly influencing the way she navigated relationships, work, and personal boundaries. Building stability through effort. In high school, Meg distinguished herself not through spectacle but through persistence. At Bethel High School, she was known for her work ethic, academic focus, and reliability. She earned recognition for leadership and character, not because she sought approval, but because she showed up consistently. Scholarships followed, reflecting both her intellectual ability and her discipline. These achievements were not about ambition in the traditional sense. They were about building security from within. Education represented independence. Structure represented safety. When she transitioned to university life, first at the University of Connecticut and later at New York University, she continued supporting herself through commercial work. These early acting jobs were practical rather than aspirational. They paid bills. They created momentum. Acting, at that stage, was not a calling or a dream. It was a tool, a way to move forward, a way to remain self-sufficient without relying on visibility as validation. Choosing the risk. By the early 1980s, opportunity began arriving faster than reflection allowed. A role on the daytime series, As the World Turns, offered both financial stability and professional momentum. Accepting it required a difficult decision, leaving university just one semester before completing her degree. It wasn't romanticized. It wasn't framed as destiny. It was frightening, uncertain, and deeply practical. But it was also necessary. She stepped into that uncertainty deliberately, understanding that growth rarely feels comfortable in the moment. Around the same time, she made another measured choice, changing her professional name. It wasn't about rejecting her identity, but about navigating an industry that favored simplicity over nuance. Meg Ryan fit easily into casting sheets and credits. It was a compromise she understood intellectually, even if it carried emotional complexity she wouldn't fully unpack until much later. Learning the shape of the industry, early film work introduced Meg to the realities of Hollywood without illusion. Long hours, high expectations, and sharp criticism were part of the learning curve. She was labeled early, often described as innocent or approachable before she had space to define herself. Those labels followed her into auditions and meetings, shaping perception before performance. When projects failed or roles disappeared, she didn't retreat. She studied instead. Acting classes, technical training, and personal discipline became anchors. Rejection became familiar, but it never became personal. Each setback reinforced endurance rather than resentment. These years taught her a critical lesson. Visibility does not guarantee stability, and success does not protect against uncertainty. The industry rewarded resilience, but rarely acknowledged its cost. When everything changed at once. The mid-1980s marked a turning point that arrived without instruction. Top Gun introduced her to a global audience almost instantly, transforming anonymity into recognition overnight. Fame did not arrive gently. It arrived fully formed, carrying expectation, scrutiny, and projection. She worked through discomfort and exhaustion, learning quickly that professional success often demands emotional adaptability. Set environments carried pressure, interpersonal tension, and relentless pacing. The film opened doors she had worked years to approach, but it also introduced a question she hadn't anticipated. Who gets to decide who I am now? Public perception moved faster than personal understanding, and the space between those two realities grew increasingly complex. Adjusting to recognition. Sudden recognition reshaped not only her career, but her relationship with the world around her. Everyday experiences changed quietly but permanently. Privacy became conditional. Assumptions followed her into rooms she hadn't spoken in yet. While opportunities expanded, so did expectations about appearance, personality, and emotional availability. She learned to navigate conversations where people believed they already knew her. Rather than resist outright, she observed. She adapted. She learned when to engage and when to withdraw. These adjustments weren't acts of performance, but of survival. Fame did not erase her internal compass, but it tested its durability. Holding on to ground, throughout this period of rapid change, Meg remained anchored to the values shaped in childhood: discipline, preparation, and self-containment. She resisted the urge to chase every opportunity or define herself through momentum alone. Instead, she focused on craft, choosing roles that allowed learning rather than visibility alone. She understood intuitively that longevity required more than recognition. It required internal stability. That awareness, formed long before the world was watching, would later become one of her greatest strengths. The quiet cost of momentum. As her career accelerated, the pace left little room for pause. Travel, promotion, and production schedules compressed time into fragments. Even moments of success required energy she rarely had space to replenish. The exhaustion didn't arrive dramatically. It accumulated gradually. Joy became something to schedule, Reflection became something postponed. Yet she continued, not out of obligation, but out of commitment to the work she had chosen. This period taught her that resilience often looks calm from the outside, even when it feels strained within. Identity under observation. With recognition came a narrowing of public identity. Roles began reinforcing expectation rather than exploration. Audiences embraced familiarity, sometimes resisting growth. Meg felt the subtle tension between who she was becoming and who she was expected to remain. That tension wasn't rebellious, it was reflective. She questioned how much of herself belonged to the work and how much needed protection. These questions did not have immediate answers, but they shaped the choices she would later make with greater clarity. The foundation beneath the story. Looking back, it becomes clear that Meg Ryan's early years were less about fame and more about foundation. Discipline learned before recognition. Self-reliance developed before opportunity. Emotional awareness shaped long before scrutiny. These elements did not prevent difficulty, but they allowed endurance. Her story is not defined by a single moment of success, but by a steady accumulation of choices made quietly, thoughtfully, and often without applause. Becoming before being seen. Before the name became recognizable, before the image solidified, before expectation arrived, there was simply a person learning how to build stability in an unpredictable world. That early formation, rooted in effort, responsibility, and introspection, became the thread that carried her forward. Even as circumstances changed, that internal architecture remained. It is there, beneath every role and reinvention, reminding us that what lasts longest is often what is built before anyone is watching. Becoming the face of feeling. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Meg Ryan had become a symbol of emotional openness in popular culture. Her performances carried an ease that felt personal rather than performed, as if she were allowing audiences into something private and unguarded. When Harry Met Sally did more than succeed at the box office, it settled into collective memory, quoted and revisited as something deeply familiar. What wasn't visible was the emotional effort required to remain that open while being observed from every angle. The work demanded presence, intuition, and vulnerability day after day, often without space to recover between scenes. The warmth audiences embraced came from real emotional availability, and sustaining that accessibility required more resilience than applause could ever acknowledge. Success brought admiration, but it also brought expectation, the unspoken demand to remain endlessly relatable, endlessly open, even when fatigue crept in quietly. Love intertwined with work. As her career accelerated, Meg's personal life unfolded alongside professional momentum rather than separate from it. Relationships formed within environments shaped by long hours, creative intensity, and limited privacy. Love, partnership, and work overlapped in ways that left little room for separation. Marriage and motherhood arrived during periods of intense visibility, and with them came joy layered with responsibility. The birth of her son reshaped her internal priorities immediately, grounding her in ways no professional milestone ever had. Motherhood brought clarity, but it also revealed how little flexibility the industry offers for complexity. She learned to hold competing truths at once, gratitude and exhaustion, fulfillment and fear, without presenting them publicly. What mattered most was protected quietly, even when the world felt entitled to explanation. Carrying visibility into private spaces. Fame has a way of following people into moments meant to be personal, and for Meg, that boundary became increasingly fragile. Public recognition did not pause for private milestones. Attention remained constant, even during periods that required inward focus. She learned to navigate rooms where curiosity outweighed empathy, where assumptions preceded conversation. Rather than resist entirely, she adapted with restraint. Privacy became intentional rather than assumed. She learned that not every experience required translation for public understanding, and that silence could be as deliberate as speech. When the frame became too narrow. As the 1990s progressed, Meg began reaching beyond the familiar roles audiences had embraced so easily. She sought work that reflected complexity rather than comfort, choosing characters that required deeper emotional immersion. Preparation became more demanding, and the emotional cost of that work was real. These choices were not about rejecting her past success, but about honoring her present curiosity. Yet familiarity can be limiting, and public perception struggled to expand alongside her. The same visibility that once created opportunity now carried judgment. Growth was interpreted as deviation. Exploration was mistaken for departure. The tension between expectation and authenticity grew heavier with each project. The weight of public narratives. When aspects of her personal life became the subject of widespread commentary, the response left little room for nuance. Stories simplified what was complex, and conclusions were drawn without context. Meg chose not to engage with every narrative presented about her. She understood that defending oneself endlessly can become another form of erasure. Instead, she withdrew from the noise. Therapy replaced promotion. Parenting replaced performance. Healing replaced explanation. Silence was not avoidance. It was preservation. In stepping back, she reclaimed the ability to define herself without constant interruption. Stepping away without disappearing. For a time, she lived outside the center of public attention, focusing on raising her son and building a life that felt grounded rather than exposed. She turned down roles that no longer aligned with her values, not out of fear, but out of discernment. Watching the industry evolve from a distance allowed perspective. Absence did not diminish her contribution. It clarified it. She learned that relevance is not measured by visibility alone, and that rest is not the opposite of purpose. It is often what makes purpose sustainable. Redefining success. Quietly. During these years away from constant scrutiny, Meg recalibrated what success meant to her. It was no longer tied to volume or frequency, but to alignment. She invested time in relationships that nourished rather than depleted. Creative impulses were followed selectively rather than reflexively. The pace slowed, and in that slowing, intention returned. She was no longer interested in proving capability or reclaiming position. The work, when it came, needed to feel honest before it felt visible, returning on her own terms. When Meg returned to filmmaking, it was with a different orientation. Smaller projects replaced large-scale expectations. Creative control mattered more than reach. Directing offered a shift in perspective, from being watched to watching, from being interpreted to interpreting. Storytelling became about lived experience rather than archetype. The work was quieter, but it carried depth shaped by time away. There was no attempt to recreate a moment or compete with memory. The focus was presence rather than performance. The return was not a comeback. It was a continuation, shaped by reflection. Choosing depth over noise. Today, Meg Ryan's relationship with her career reflects discernment rather than demand. She chooses depth over volume, meaning over momentum. Her presence is intentional, her work selective. She no longer measures success by constant affirmation, but by internal alignment. The noise of expectation has softened, replaced by clarity earned through experience. She remains curious, thoughtful, and protective of what matters most. The shape of endurance. Meg Ryan's story is not defined by a single era or image, but by adaptation. It is the story of a woman who learned how to remain emotionally available without surrendering herself entirely, who learned that stepping back is not the same as giving up, that silence can be strength, that evolution does not require permission. Her endurance was never about remaining unchanged. It was about continuing with integrity. A legacy beyond familiarity. Beyond iconic roles and cultural memory, her legacy rests in something quieter. The permission she offers to change, to step away, to return differently, to protect one's inner life in a world that demands access. Her story reminds us that emotional honesty does not require constant exposure, and that grace often reveals itself most clearly when performance ends and presence remains. Reclaiming the narrative. Opening a production company marked a turning point. For the first time, Meg was not just part of stories, she was shaping them. The projects she chose centered on complexity, resilience, and the cost of silence. These were not revenge narratives. They were reflections. She protected her son's boundaries fiercely, understanding how easily public storytelling can become personal harm. The woman she is now today. Meg Ryan speaks less about fame and more about authorship, about choosing how much of oneself belongs to the world. She describes her life not as a comeback, but as an evolution. The softness people once loved is still there, but it is paired with clarity, with limits, with peace. Legacy beyond the frame. Meg Ryan's story is not about losing something and trying to get it back. It is about understanding what was never meant to be permanent. Fame fades, images shift. What remains is agency, the ability to choose presence over performance, truth over approval. In that sense, her legacy is not frozen in a single era. It continues, quietly, intentionally, human.